Today is Monday, July 18th, 2016. My name is Elissa Kaplan. It is my honor and privilege today to interview Audrey Schechter for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. We are sitting in the archives of the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good afternoon, Audrey.
Good afternoon.
Please tell us your name.
My name is Audrey Schechter.
What do people call you?
People call me Audrey.
No nicknames there,
No
huh?
nickname.
Oh, good. Audrey, when were you born?
1934.
Okay, you want to tell us your month and day?
Yes, July 6, 1934.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
You just had a birthday.
Yes, I did.
And Audrey, where were you born?
I was born in Manhattan. I lived there for 7 years.
And were you born in a hospital?
Yes, I was born in a hospital.
What's the name of it?
Park East.
Is it still there?
No.
No. Okay. You're still here, but the hospital's not still here. How did your family get to America?
My family was born in America. My mother, father were born in America. My grandparents were born in, I think, Austria-Hungary and came over early as young children and lived here.
What years do you think that might have been approximately?
Well, my mother was born in 2008. She was the firstborn in the family. So maybe 2008, in 1908. And so I would guess that it was early in the 20th century.
Okay, so in the so 1900, early
Yes.
1900s. Okay, right. Well, Schechter could be a German name.
Yes, it is. It means actually Schechter, which is my married name, means shukat, butcher in Hebrew, and my grandfather was a kosher butcher.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, Schechter.
Yeah.
Yes. What's your maiden name, Audrey?
Levine.
Oh, Levine. Okay. So a Levite there. All right. Tell us your parents' names.
Ruth and Abraham.
Oh.
Very. I feel more and more fortunate to be closer to the Torah that way. Go ahead.
There you go. I was going to say Levine, Abraham. Oh my goodness. So your father was Abraham Schechter, and your mother?
No, my father was Abraham Levine.
Levine, and your mother was
Ruth Levine.
Ruth. And what was her? Do you know her other name?
Yes, Greenwald.
Greenwald. Okay. What did your mom and dad do?
My mother was mostly a stay-at-home housewife. My father was an insurance agent, and we actually moved out of Manhattan when I was 7 and moved to the Bronx where I grew up.
Oh, okay. All right. Good. Okay. And how did your parents meet? Do you know?
Yes. My mother had polio when she was 8 years old, and she was very much, excuse the expression, mentally scarred by that, because my grandfather had money, and she had surgery on the tendons in her feet. She was the only one she probably had at least 4 siblings at that time, or 3. She subsequently had 5 siblings. She was the only one in the family who got it. And as she told the story to me many times, she was deathly afraid of polio. I looked up the polio epidemic in 2016, came from Brooklyn and worked its way into Manhattan. Of course, polio was the dreaded disease, and she was 8, so she could read. She read the newspaper, and lo and behold, she got polio.
Oh,
But because
so there was an actual epidemic.
there was, I looked it up.
In 1916.
Where she would have been 8. She was born in 1908. But my grandfather had money, and she had surgery up and down her legs, the tendons, which would have given her no stability or anything. She had surgery on replacement tendons.
Wow.
And she always felt disfigured, not sure of herself, although she was a very bright woman. So she became a bookkeeper. She really wanted to be a lawyer, but my grandfather said only the boys in the family are allowed to be educated. When my uncles became a doctor, and the other two others were pharmacists. And I think she sort of felt bereft a little bit. And she's certainly unsure of herself, although later she had lots to say. She met my father because he was a salesman and she was a bookkeeper, and he came in to her office, and she was getting older, and that was not very good those days. So he asked her to marry her, and they were married.
So he literally swept her off her
Yes,
feet.
yes, yes, literally.
Did they have a Jewish wedding?
Yes, they had a Jewish wedding.
So you have pictures of them.
Well, yes, I do, some.
Some,
They
yeah,
go
not
back
like
so
today.
long.
Mhm. Tell us a little bit about your early family life.
My early family life was interesting. My mother had lost a baby to meningitis 1 year before I was born. The baby was 3 months old. So, and then she had me the next year. I feel that she really sheltered me. And I got asthma when I was 7, and God forbid she had to give me shots. And it was somewhat cumbersome because she had lost a child the year before. I think she put me into a little glass cage. I wasn't allowed to do gym, I wasn't allowed to do any exercises, but otherwise it was a good family life. And I very much wanted a sibling. And I finally, I think, talked them into it. My brother is 10 years younger than me. I asked for a sister, but it just didn't work out. So
I gave you half.
so my early family life, I felt I was the only child. When my brother came along, she had the baby, but I wasn't allowed to babysit for the baby, even though I was 10 years older at the time, because she was afraid. She was afraid to leave her baby in the care of this child who did very well in school and really felt very responsible, although my mother interceded in certain conditions and made sure I was in special classes, etc.
Can you tell us one story about your mother's going to school and making
Yes.
things happen?
Yes. In elementary school, I guess, I was in a class called the Opportunity Class. It was a combined 5th and 6th grade. It was advanced material, and it was a special chance. When I went into junior high school in the 7th grade, I was not put in the RA Rapid Advance immediately. She came to school and she made her point, and I skipped a year between junior high school and high school, which she wanted, really more than I would have wanted, because I had to take Latin in order to be an RA, and I also had to take French. And I feel I missed something because I graduated at 17 and I was really a child then in my head, because I was sheltered.
But she was looking out for what she thought were
Yes,
your best
yes,
interests.
yes.
Interests, yes. You moved as a young child. Do you
Yes, I
remember
did.
the move?
No, not at all. Other than we had lived next door to my grandmother, who was a very assertive person. And I remember when we moved to the Bronx, at least that was out of the picture, and it was a complete family.
Right, right. Did you have the kind of neighborhood where the kids played outside?
Absolutely. Stoop ball. We all went out after school and, hung around. Although it's not who I was, but I had a group of friends. They were all Jewish. I was in a Jewish neighborhood. And I was comfortable going out to play after school. Always did my homework and always got good grades and always did what I was supposed to do. But I did go out and hang out, which surprises me at the time.
Was your new place a house or an apartment?
It was an apartment, but it was a 3-bedroom apartment. And that was certainly a move up from the 1-bedroom apartment. I once asked my brother, because I slept in the living room, they had 1 bedroom. So I once asked my brother where he slept. My brother remembers everything. He said, Audrey, I was in a crib until I was 5 years old when they let down the side and hung out. I said, oh, okay. But he had his own room afterwards.
Your mother was very protective.
She was very protective and very protective. And I suspect, since I am a nurse, that she was really traumatized by the loss of the child at 3 months of age. And so, and then I got asthma when I was 7, and she frequently had to boil syringes to give me an adrenaline shot, which is, quite a responsibility for my mother in the middle of the night.
Right. Oh goodness. You talked about going outside and feeling comfortable with the other kids who were there. They were mostly or all Jewish.
Yes.
Describe your home, the home you grew up in, from a Jewish point of view.
Well, it's interesting. I thought back to that. I did not have any formal Jewish education, but my mother lit candles every Friday night, had a Shabbat dinner, and she also kept kosher. I don't know why she did that, other than her mother did it, because she didn't, I don't think, now that I have been a Havarah for 43 years, understand about Shabbat or even a kosher home, other than she knew that kosher meat was better than the other. That was, and we went to services on the high holy days, and we weren't allowed, and it was impressed upon me that no lights on and nothing, and we fasted I fasted on Yom Kippur, and I honestly, I was older at a time. I was a teenager, and I was never curious enough, and I am very curious now, to look up. I mean, I didn't have, I went to the library often, I took out books, but I never looked up Judaism per se.
Right. What was the synagogue like where you went on high holidays?
It was something called Shift Center in the Bronx. It was mainly, I think, it wasn't really a temple. They did the high holidays, and it was like the Jewish center.
Oh, okay, it was the center. Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And did your brother have a bar mitzvah?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's very interesting. I was married in September of the year, and he had his bar mitzvah in October. He had gone to school to study. I mean, he had gone to after school that Tuesday, Thursday thing, and he had a bar mitzvah.
And was that at the Shift Center also?
I don't remember where it was, because I was married the month before. Went on my honeymoon and came home to his bar mitzvah.
I want to get back to your wedding, but was it a big occasion?
Yes.
What happened for the bar mitzvah? How was that celebrated?
Celebrated, if I remember, he did what I would call a reform portion, and very little Torah, half Torah, and he chanted a little bit, and it was for the family, for the whole family, my mother's and her siblings. I think it was a special occasion.
And everybody got dressed up?
Yes.
Did you have a party or a meal?
Yes, we had a meal afterwards.
Great. Okay, so it sounds like Um, before we get you married, tell us about going your general. Well, you did. You told us about your school. Can you tell us the names of some of your schools?
Oh, my school record is most interesting.
Oh, good.
Yes. I graduated, as I said, at 17, and I went into City College, which was like your average. My average was maybe 98. You were automatically accepted. I was a biochem major, and I lasted for a total of 2.5 years because the courses were rather difficult. I had to learn German because I was going to read in the original German in order to do the research. And I decided I really did not want to be in a laboratory. I had wanted to be a nurse from the I wanted to be a doctor when I was 10, and I wanted to be a nurse when I was a little older. And my mother said, absolutely not. She was controlling, and it's not a nice thing for a Jewish girl to do. So after 2.5 years, I did quit City College because I really, physics was really not for me. Maybe I should have been a biology major. I got fairly good grades, but I was not happy in the curriculum at all. Never quit anything else in my life. It broke her heart. And I said, I want to be a nurse. And she said no. And in the interim, or after I quit, and she was so disheartened, her brother was a doctor. She spoke to him, and he felt that I should go to nursing school. And somehow, my mother and my uncle must have enrolled me in Bellevue School of Nursing, because all I knew is I was accepted and you are to start in September. And I was thrilled. Now, I had a 3-year course. I could have, if I checked the right box, I could have gotten my Bachelor of Science in Nursing because Bellevue was affiliated with NYU, and I certainly had enough credits for that. But I wanted to be an RN. So I checked RN, and it was a 3-year program, and it was another life that I went into. I had promised my mother that I would get my Bachelor of Science in Nursing. 30 years later, I graduated from nursing school in 1957, and then 1987. They were then advertising RN to BSN through through New York State, and they accepted all of my credits from 30 years ago.
Wow.
And all I had to do was 3 measly nursing tasks. I had been a nurse for all those years. I had to go to a hospital and be observed while I counted IV drops and made decisions and take care of 1 adult patient and 1 child patient who was 12. And then go to Albany one day and do a physical exam on someone, and then watch videos and answer questions about what a professional nurse with a BSN would do when she was in charge of a unit. Anyhow, I got my degree then. And I decided, well, I had been working all these years in the intensive care unit, and I decided I'd go on and get my master's. And the hospital, since I wasn't full-time, the hospital paid for 2/3 of my master's. I got it at the College of New Rochelle after 4 years because I went at night. And I graduated with a 4.1 average. So once I became, got my master's, my job in the hospital changed very much because I became what was called a clinical nurse specialist. I had worked in Stanford Hospital. That was interesting too.
Audrey, can I back you up a little bit?
Yes, please do.
Where was your first, so you got your degree from Bellevue?
Yes,
your
it was
original
yes,
RN degree.
yes.
And then tell us about where you worked first.
I had to according to the City of New York's guidelines, work in a city hospital. I got married right after I finished nursing school, like the week after. And we moved to Mount Vernon because my husband worked in Stamford. And I worked at the Bronx Municipal Hospital Center, which is Jacoby Hospital in the Bronx. But I became pregnant and I worked there maybe 8 months. That was my working history. And I did not go back to work for, I think, 8 years. Now, what got me back to work was most
What
interesting.
was your job? What kinds of things did you do?
I worked on a medical floor. I was in charge of the medical patients, gave direct patient care. I was asked to become the nurse manager of that floor. And I said I couldn't do it. I was pregnant and I would be leaving soon. I decided at that time, this was in the 50s,
Wow.
to stay home and be an at-home mother, which was kind of, I would have been better off if I worked. We moved to Stamford then, and Stamford was another awakening for me. Bellevue had been a complete awakening for me.
In what way?
In what way? Well, I really, as I said, I was sheltered, and I never really met prisoners, and I never took care of, well, there were homeless people in that. Many people came from the men's shelter, and the psychiatric hospitals were still open then, so that they could be committed to a psychiatric hospital, but they had to be in Bellevue for 1 month, observed, and say that they were really sick and they should be in the psychiatric hospital. But that prepared me because I met a lot of immigrant populations. Chinese lived, Bellevue's district was the whole Lower East Side. I met a lot of Jewish patients, and my name was Levine, and I was grabbed and said, have a Jewish heart. And I realized many of these people were probably Holocaust survivors in the 50s. And I took care of everybody equally, this is what I said, because there were a cluster of Puerto Ricans who had come to the United States then. And I was exposed to many different populations and many cultures. And it wasn't until a few years later that cultural changes had to be observed when people came into a hospital. And I loved being there. I was, again, not with any Jewish people. There were 10 Jews in a class of 150. I made friends with some of the people. The other people all got along because we were all, we lived there. We lived at Bellevue. There was a residence. And because I did all of my training at Bellevue.
Now, were all the nurses women?
No, they had what they called the Mills School of Nursing, and they had 9 men in it. And LaGuardia's nephew was one of the ones in there. They did different things, but they were, I guess, the first male nurses who had come into the nursing field. There are a lot more now. But my 3 years at Bellevue was living in New York City was nice, but it really was an awakening to come across people with whom I had to take care of, well, with whom I had to relate interpersonally. And many of them didn't have a family, and the prisoners were very nice. They were chained to the bed. We couldn't go to the prison ward because that had to work when I was in psychiatry, because that had the murderers also. And I believe that I was able to grow up. I learned a lot of things, and I did all my training within Bellevue. Many of the people in those days had to go to different hospitals for different things, but I was able to stay in Bellevue. I did my psychiatry and my obstetrics there, and it was a whole different way of nursing, certainly, than there is today. And the people were very sick, but they could die. There was no resuscitation, there was nothing. And I was given the responsibility of working on different wards, being in charge as a kid. And I really worked it out so that I felt comfortable in the role.
So then you moved to Stanford, and
Yes.
you worked. And tell us about getting a job when you went back to work.
Well, I moved to Stanford, felt like an absolute alien because the natives there were a cluster of Jews in Stanford who were very much together, the natives in Stanford. In fact, I have friends now who are natives, and they really stay with each other.
What was the year when you moved?
And I moved to Stanford in 1958, a year after I was married and had the one child. And it was just I lived in a garden apartment, so I met a few other people, but I felt kind of lost. And I did join Hadassah, and that gave me a Jewish feeling, thank God, and met a lot of Jewish friends. And when my children were when they were both able to go to nursery school, I met Sarah Walker, who was the principal of the nursery school. My children did have a nice Jewish education in nursery school. And she asked me if I would become camp nurse for two summers. The JC camp was then up on Briarbrae Road, really north, and it was really a camp experience, and Shabbat, and that whole thing that was just wonderful for me. All the kids were Jewish. I got to meet their parents. I wore, a white shirt and white shorts, so they knew I was their nurse. And I did that for 2 months, and I felt like I was being a nurse again. I mean, nobody went to the hospital. The injuries were really very minor. I started in my started thinking like a nurse. If a lot of people were absent one day, I would call home in case an epidemic of something was starting. I think the family thought I was crazy, but I try to keep track of what was happening. And some of the girls would come up. They wanted to talk to me, so they would say they had a stomach ache and lie down. And I got to know more Jews through that. And actually, my husband never said you can't work, you can work, or what work. And I decided in 1966 to go to Stanford Hospital and offered to work there 1 day a week. So I was hired, and I said to myself, gee, it's been 8 years since I've been in the hospital. Refresher course? No refresher course. I was just, they spent maybe 3 days with me, and then I worked every Friday. And the reason I worked Friday, 3 to 11, was because I ended up staying there till like 2 in the morning till I did all my charting and whatever. So I didn't have to get up early the next morning. I worked there for a total from 1966 to 1995 in different positions.
I was going to say, what wards did you work in?
I worked, I took in the early 70s, like 1970, the critical care course and the arrhythmia course. And I then went into the intensive care unit to work. And I loved working in there because I just felt that I was really being useful, and I was really getting to know families as well as patients. And I also, at the same time, a few years later, one of the cardiology groups who happened to have been in Darien wanted a nurse in their office to do twice a week from 9 to 12. I did trans-telephonic pacemaker testing. Now, in 1973 or whatever, the pacemakers were really new, and they would come in the office, and I would show them the box that they were given for transmission, and I set up a schedule where I would call them, and none of the doctors were in the office in the morning, but I really got to know the patients, and I would get the strip, and I would notify the doctors if anything was really untoward. And then if I worked there 9 to 12, I could do my 3 to 11 in the intensive care unit, because I think I worked 3 or 4 days a week, not full time. And 3 to 11 was the shifts that I usually worked. I got a nice babysitter. Daddy came home and took the children out to dinner. They weren't that young then, but they asked me if I could work more. And it was just lovely. And then during the summers, they would go off to camp, and I could work full time. And one day, one summer, my oldest daughter, who was then 15, went to Israel for the summer and worked on a reserve, which is now an Israel National Reserve, called Niyat Kadima. It's halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, where at that time, and it was the early 70s, they were, the children, the girls there, the boys, the girls, were to reconstruct sites from the Bible in flowers, in tree planting, in things like that. And it has since, I've looked it up, become a national reserve. And they do weddings and bar mitzvahs there. And my daughter was really grounded with doing that.
Who did she go with? Did she go with?
With a tour, with a tour, a select tour. One of her friends went along there too, and I still kept the letters because the letters were so marvelously descriptive of also traveling and seeing Israel. And then she came home, and then it was 1973. She came home, and I joined the Havarah because my friend had been very adamant on. No, I had friends who belonged. The Havarah was started in '72, and I had friends who belonged, and they talked about Rabbi Golub, this wonderful rabbi, and so we did join it in '73. And I didn't realize when we joined, well, maybe I did realize, my son was going to be 13 the next year. My daughter had been confirmed, because we belonged to Temple Sinai, I didn't say that. And they weren't doing bat mitzvahs then, so she was confirmed, and she went to Israel. So in 1973, we joined the Havarah, and my son became a bar mitzvah in 1974, and it was just an awakening in Jewish learning for us. And I have learned so much, and we've been there when Mark Olive had started his Shalom TV. We were there for him when he started the Jewish broadcasting system. And so I really got my Judaism, because we had study on Saturday mornings, alternate Saturdays. We set up a plan. My husband's been treasurer the whole time.
So she usually does 15 minutes.
And I was still working at time. I then became, in 1991, because I finished my master's, the clinical nurse specialist for medicine and surgery in the hospital, which was a marvelous job for me, a thoroughly enjoyable job, because I was given carte blanche to change policy and procedure. I wrote up policy and procedure. I met with the head of medicine, the head of surgery, and I got the approval for these kinds of things. I had had breast cancer in 1992 while I was in a clinical nurse specialist, and I'm probably the only one who came back from having cancer surgery, finding a huge plant and chocolate in my room. And I had 6 weeks of radiation, and I fortunately was working in the building, so I called the radiation department and say, what time today? And run down, have my radiation, go back to work. My job really was, as a clinical nurse specialist, I was able to change policy and procedures and write new things into the procedures that I thought were necessary.
So, what's one example of something you changed for the better?
Yes. One example was nurses were on the floor were allowed to give IV push medications. Like if something like Lasix, a diuretic, was allowed, was ordered, you'd have to call the doctor and you'd have to do that. In the intensive care unit, we were allowed to do everything. And that was changed to allowing the floor nurses to do it. One of the other things that I did was, if a patient's sugar was above, I did numbers, if a patient's sugar was up above a certain amount, then give X number of units of insulin, nurse-wise. And if it was real low, there was something else you could do, that you could give glucagon, which acted immediately to raise it, and I wrote a whole thing out, and it went through this department and that department, and it had to be approved. One of the other things I did, which was not really followed, nurses, the medical nurses love to disimpact a constipated patient. It was dangerous because you could stop the heart rate, you could have a vasovagal attack, and I wrote and had approved something that nurses could not disimpact the patient. They had to call the doctor if the patient was constipated. I gave and presented a lot of classes. I did a continuing education programs with doctors, and I scheduled them so that the nurses could come down and know in advance. The doctors were very cooperative. I set up a whole system of delivering a lecture, whatever. I mentored when I was in ICU. I mentored. As a clinical nurse specialist, the nurses came to me with any kind of problem. I was also a wound care specialist for the hospital at that time, so I made wound care recommendations, and I got them okayed by the doctor so they could be written out in the chart. I taught new nurses who had been mentored new nurses who had just graduated, and they were very new to the hospital, and I did a lot of that, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing it, and I thoroughly enjoyed having the job. In 1995, the hospital gave a golden handshake, which nurses, I mean, business does that, but nursing, anyone who is over 50 or 55 and have been there 10 years was allowed to retire, get their pension, I was given, well, it was choice, didn't have to do it. A year and a half salary, a year and a half COBRA, an extra $10,000 for my vacation sick time, and a gorgeous necklace from Jose Grant, who was a jeweler in town. And we had about 8 of us took it. Now, I did not want to leave that job. I would have had another job in the hospital, I am sure, but I did take it. And I didn't retire well, and it was my first retirement. in 6 weeks, I answered an ad for assistant director of nursing at Longridge Nursing Home, which is down on Longridge Road. Never having been in a nursing home in my life. And the director liked me and I got the job. So for a year and a half I was collecting 2 salaries, that's funny. And what I was assistant director of nursing, I was supervisor, and I also did all the wound care. Now when the director of nursing, there were times when the director of nursing was fired, I took over as director of nursing, not really knowing what to do, although I had to send all the accident incident reports if anybody fell to the state and do that kind of thing. I was in charge of all the narcotics. I received them from the pharmacy. I kept the records, and then DEA came in and I had to discard everything with them. I mean, I can't believe that I did these things without really giving it a second thought. So that lasted for about 12 years, and then I said, gee, I only want to work 1 day a week, because it was lovely working with the geriatric patients, because I studied that in school, and I did a lot in the place to try to in-service the staff as well as patients. I started something called Reminiscence and Life Review, where we would talk about the first house, the first job, and the first thing, bringing memories to the surface for these people. And I said after 12 years, I only want to work 1 day a week. And they didn't want it. There's a new head director of nursing there. And so I said, well, you know, I was 75, well, I don't know, in the 70s at that point. And one of the nurses who came in, she was the nurse consultant at one of the visiting nurse agencies, and she said, why don't you go to the agency and see what you... I said, I've never been a visiting nurse. I don't know. Well, I went to something called a Medicist, who is on the New York Stock Exchange, I have a visiting nurse, and I got a job. So at per diem, and I made my own hours when I went. I did a lot of wound care, and also I got to know the patients and their families. I really thought it was important. I had always been very aware of families playing a part in the sick person's life, and I mentored in that job all the time. A new nurse would come on board and I'd tell her how to fill out the form and how to do the charting so Medicare would cover it. And for some reason I was assigned only to assisted livings. I mean, instead of going into downtown Stanford or something else. I didn't ask for it, but that's what I got. And I then retired when I was 78. And 2 of the buildings I went to asked me if I'd work per diem there. And I said, I don't know anything about working in assisted living. And they said they would show me. And my friend said, no more parties for you. So that was it. But I had a lot of wonderful experiences and a lot of sadness, because when I worked in ICU, well, actually when I worked in Stanford Hospital, I saw people who I knew, and one of my very good friends died in ICU. She was terminal cancer and I knew it, but I watched her heart stop slowly. And it was, I realized with compassion and sadness how fragile life is, and yeah, try to be a better person. I won't say that. I enjoyed so much what I did. I absolutely loved nursing, and I cannot believe it. Actually, what I did is I had my own children come from time to time to the intensive care unit so they'd have a little slice of life that was very different from them. And my grandchildren who lived close by, I had come to the nursing home. And my oldest grandchild, who couldn't have been 10 at the time, did manicures for the elderly people and talked to them. Both of them talked to the elderly people. She said, "Grandma, the nails are filthy." I said, "Well, so the nurses' aides aren't doing such a good job, so I could take care of that." But I love nursing, and I still do. I have been unfortunate enough to have had experiences with hospitals after that. And I had 4 replacements, 2 hips, 2 knees, 2 fractures of the femur, and went to Greenwich Hospital for that. But they also knew that I was a nurse there. And one of the nurses who, when I was clinical nurse specialist at Stanford, had now moved to Greenwich. And she worked in Greenwich, and she asked if she could scrub in on 2 of my surgeries, which, she said, "Audrey, I want to be with you." And that really made me feel kind of special. And then I had open heart surgery in 2014. And I had it in Stanford Hospital. And my friend, "You had it in Stanford Hospital?" Well, a nurse I had worked with for 20 years was the nurse head of cardiac surgeon. And so the doctor assured me that I would be treated as a VIP and let me know, the nurses let me know that I had worked there, where I had worked. They didn't know me. They didn't know me then. This was from 1995 to 2014. But I was absolutely known. In fact, when I went to Van Munching for rehab, one of the nurses there said, "Do you want to read your chart?" And I said, "No." And within 4 weeks, the doctors told me I was cured. I'd had my aortic valve replaced, and I had double bypass. And after 4 weeks, he told me I could do push-ups and drive and do everything.
Fabulous. I want to ask, there's a fabulous description of your wonderful and rich career. I want to find out a little bit more about your family. How did you meet your husband?
At Bellevue. Very surprisingly.
He wasn't chained to the bed.
No. The Columbia School of Engineering had a dance with Bellevue. And he was in the Columbia School of Engineering. And supposedly I was going to have a blind date that night, only the blind date never showed up. And I was not in a good mood. So I went up to the floor where I lived, and I put my hands on my hips and told my friends. And they said, "Go down to the dance. There's a dance right downstairs." I said, "No, I'm not in a good mood." So my husband came over and asked me to dance, and I said no. So we sat and we talked for a while, and then he invited me to his senior prom, and it was a few weeks later. I remember I was working tuberculosis at the time, so I didn't know where to scrub myself first, and I went. And I met him, and he's very much an engineer still. I mean, he's not working now. He then became a computer consultant. And it just happened, and it was lovely. He's a quiet, very analytical person. And I gush, so.
So you got married in...
The year after.
and where was the wedding?
The wedding was in the Burnside Manor in the Bronx, and I came down a staircase curtain opened, and I came down. My parents had planned the whole thing, and we had a rabbi, and because I have a ketubah. Actually, the rabbi was also a lawyer, so he knew that I was working at Bronx Municipal Hospital Center at the time, so he was trying to get me to get him business. But I still have a ketuvah.
There you go, there you go. And you said your move to Stanford was because of your husband's job. What was he doing?
He was working for a consulting company in Stanford and doing consulting on a lot of different projects. He was an industrial engineer. He did operations research. He did all kinds of things like that. He subsequently, right after we moved into our house in 1964, he got a job for Lever Brothers in New York City, and he hated the commute. In fact, we do not go, he worked there for about 21, 22 years, and he just wasn't a person to work in industry. And he became a computer consultant, and he hated the trip to New York.
Where did you live in Stanford?
Where we live right now,
Which is
just north of the Merritt Parkway, and the Merritt Park, just north of the Merritt Parkway, and it wasn't very developed at that time. My children would say, after school, could play with a friend. Well, the friend was 25 minutes away, up in North Stanford, and I've been in the house for 50 some odd years.
Oh my, oh my. And you had children. Tell us a little bit about your children.
I had my daughter, I had first, and when she went to college, she studied fine arts. She went to Wesleyan, and she went to Rome for 2 semesters because she met a boy there, but she got married. She's divorced now. She lives in New York City. She's a fashion stylist.
What's her name? What's her name?
Audrey Schechter. She worked for Anna Wintour at Vogue for 8 years. If you saw The Devil Wears Prada, she was that girl. But Anna liked her. Anna liked her so much. And she got along with her very well, and she never had a nasty thing to say about her. In fact, when she got married, she eloped, and Anna made a party for her down in her apartment in Greenwich Village. And all I remember is when we drove in to be part of that party, Mark Jacobs jumped out of the cab in front of us to run in, and she was divorced because she married an Italian guy who was, he wasn't abusive, but he was very, very self-willed and very determined. So now she's just in the city and enjoying herself.
And your other child?
He is also divorced. He married a Colombian woman, and they live right near us.
What's his name?
Michael. And he sells legal insurance, identity theft, and he lives in Stanford. Although he and my daughter-in-law, and I told her I'll forever call her my daughter-in-law, she's just a wonderful, compassionate person, still see each other because the 2 children, I have 2 grandchildren, one 17, going into college in September, going to Emerson in Boston,
Nice.
and the other is 20, she'll be 21, in her last year at Pace University in downtown New York in the financial district. She's in the School of Business because both the girls took the Academy of Finance course in high school. The older one was interested in business, and she told her sister it would be a good thing to put on your resume. My younger one, they both became vegans and are very interested in the environment, and that's what they do.
So now you mentioned that when you moved to Stanford, you got involved in Hadassah. What
Yes.
other kind of community involvements did? I mean, you might not have had time for anything else.
No. I did. Well, I am now volunteering here. I did a lot of volunteer work for Hadassah, and I also do what I love. Once a month, at the Jewish Center has luncheon for the seniors. I am one of them, but I say my seniors. And they have it 3 times a week, but one time I do a topic called Aging Gracefully. the first thing, a lot of them are extremely interested in what I talk about. I talk about medical things. Or the beginning of July, I did microbiomes, intestinal flora for them, and won them. The only thing I said, I give medical information for like 10 minutes, and then we have a discussion. And they want to know, like, what to ask the doctor, what to do, and I love that.
Sounds great.
And what kind of the volunteer. Oh, I decided when I retired that I wanted to learn more about Judaism. So I took the Melton course for 2 years at the Jewish Center. Then I took the Tanakh course, the Torah portion, the Nach. I didn't quite finish because I had my open heart surgery. I took a few courses with Rabbi Hammerman, who very graciously gave his time. 4 of us were from the Havurah, 4 of us were from Temple Bethel.
Mm-hmm.
We did Psalms last and discussion, so I get involved in any of that I can.
Sounds great. And through your career and your life experience, did you ever experience any anti-Semitism?
The only anti-Semitism that I possibly, not truly, there was one time when I was working in Stanford Hospital and the nursing assistant just said, who are you? I said, my name is my husband's name. And she said, where do you live? And I lived in North Stanford. And she looked me over and then she said, do you have a mink coat or a fur coat? I said no, and I kind of she was hinting possibly at that. But I don't think, other than my mother saying it wasn't a nice thing for a Jewish girl to do, to become a nurse, I don't think that I was that I really met anti-Semitism. Even though my patients at Bellevue were certainly very mixed. They were just thrilled to be there, especially the men from the men's shelter house who had to travel around with a bag in their hand every day and go back to sleep at night. And nobody ever gave, I think, thought about it. Only when I went for my interview in the nursing home, the director said, we have to keep track. She and I had to come in every Sunday morning, well, on turns. And she said, and then you can go to church. I don't know if it meant anything really.
Right, exactly. Well, did being Jewish help you in any way, in any of your jobs? Or?
I don't think so, other than the doctors were all Jewish, and the medical students at Bellevue were all Jewish, and they were from Columbia, Cornell, and NYU, and they asked me out all the time, and I didn't like doctors, even though they weren't doctors.
Did you have any involvement in any of the wars that you lived through yourself or through other people?
No, other than when I was at Bellevue, we went to Randall's Island for a trauma, like World Trade Center, I'm thinking, a mock trauma demonstration that we would pick certain injury and different people in different cases. But the wars, no.
Yeah. You've probably seen a lot of inventions in your life.
Oh gosh.
Which ones are the most amazing to you?
The changes in the inventions, I think the automatic defibrillator would become one of the greatest things since I've had a shock patients in the ICU. And just medically, with cardiology, I think in reading, I still get medical stuff. Cardiology has had the biggest change in the ability to prolong life and to make life comfortable. And that was always my favorite, working with the cardiac patients. It was really wonderful. And the other changes that I've seen is in doctors being more aware of patients needing physicals and contacting and keeping track of certain kind of things. The doctors just have less time with patients because they're in group practice, and many of the drips that we did at Stanford Hospital were what we did. Now, I forgot to mention I went on a nurse's mission to Israel and went to Hadassah Hospital. We were allowed to pick which unit we want to go to. I went to the intensive care unit there. And I felt like if I wasn't wearing a skirt and blouse, I could have gone and taken care of those patients. It was so comfortable and familiar to me. Now, again, the cultural difference. When I was at Bellevue, the Chinese like to stay there, bathe their own patients, take care of them. And I noticed in the intensive care unit that the Arab families like to stay and take care of the patients that way. I got to talking to the nurses there, and they showed me the charting. They did. It was all in Hebrew, so I couldn't really understand. But the fact that a nurse spent time with me at 10 o'clock in the morning, which would be the busiest time, was really very impressive. The most impressive part about the Hadassah Hospital in Ankarim was their emergency room, which, speaking of inventions, was underground really, and they had everything set up there with all kinds of drips, all kinds of, when the person came in. They also had, which is one of the inventions that the Stanford Hospital now is kind of getting, the EKG could be sent in from the field, everything, all the information would be available once the patient got there. They just had to know what to do to treat the patient.
Wow.
And that kind of thing is the most valuable change. And also, when I fractured my femur, it was Christmas Eve, and my doctor was on vacation. But they could, in ONS in Greenwich, the orthopedic office, could send him the x-rays, and he knew what to order because I had a replacement in that leg already. He knew what to order, so when he came back from his 5 days off, he was ready to do my surgery. So all of that kind of thing was absolutely a change.
And that's almost miraculous. Audrey, what advice do you have for future generations? Or for people in general?
Advice? I really do suggest a physical once a year. Many of my friends call me because they have X, Y, or Z symptoms. What questions do I ask the doctor? Because I want to get, not take up much of the doctor's time, because doctors now allow 15 minutes they're allowed in the practice 15 minutes. So in order to get to the heart of the matter quickly, you have to be in advance. I think that most of the drugs that are being put on the market now are for cancer, and that's great that they're doing a lot of that. They're aware now of the harm of antibiotics being prescribed indiscriminately, and the changes on the horizon are, I think, the intestinal flora is a big thing, and also the ability to look at the brain, the different things, and visualize the brain is absolutely wonderful, because cardiac death and brain death used to be cardiac and respiratory death used to be the criteria for death. We're allowed to pull the plug not we, the doctor, when I worked in the intensive care unit. Now someone has to be declared brain dead, and the biggest thing that I see on the horizon is transplants. And the knowledge that people whose loved ones are dying, and they've decided that let them die, but that they give permission for transplants. Because when I was leaving ICU, the transplant coordinator from New Haven would come down, and we would keep people who want to give a donation alive until, and you could give something to 5 or 6 patients.
Wow.
So that's what I see on the horizon being very, very important.
So what do you tell your grandchildren about how to live their lives?
Well, their lives, as far as nutrition, they could tell me, because they're vegans and they absolutely are very, very aware of that. They're aware of exercise also, and they both do yoga, they do whatever they do. But my oldest one is particularly reading the nonfiction books about nutrition, because she really thinks maybe she would want a master's in holistic nutrition, which is quite different than marketing, because she refuses to market any product that has any detrimental effect on the population.
Wow.
So I don't have to tell my grandchildren much. They are very astute. And we live close to them, and we've been very involved in their lives, and it's really nice to see them grow up as young women, because especially my younger grandchild has lots of her own opinions.
Which is a good thing. And well, thank you for sharing your story and teaching us all about your career as a nurse.
It's not the same as politics, certainly. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, thank you.